Hey, what's going on everybody? I'm Blzane, and DC20 has a new update just around the corner, and we're going to talk about every single change, and yes, I mean it when I say every single change coming in 0.9.5. Let's talk about it. Now to start off these changes, I'm going to be talking about probably the single biggest change, and that's going to be how defense works in 0.9.5. And the way it works is instead of it being a physical defense and mystic defense, it is switching to an active defense and a passive defense. Now this could be a whole video on its own, but to give you the baseline so you understand where we're coming from, active defense is inherently the new type of defense that's going to be for pinpoint attacks. Things like sword swings, ranged projectiles, mostly things that are just targeting you. There are some niche cases, but we can talk about that for a second. Passive defense is going to be for things where you are just passively defending, right? You are just standing there tanking it. These are going to be things like AoE spells. These are going to be things that maybe, some kind of giant effect, or it could maybe even be something like a snake wrapping around you, squeezing you. So even though that is single target, it is more of your passive defense because you are standing there and taking it. There's no real necessarily evading, dodging, things like that. Now with those defensive changes come some other changes that are not necessarily due to that, but are impacted by them, and one of those is going to be the armor changes. And armor now, instead of being novice, adept, and expert, are going to go down into just 2 armor categories, which I think is way better, and that's going to be light and heavy. Obviously, it's pretty clear what the distinction is there. Light is going to be lighter armor. It will give you less benefits, but with less drawbacks. Heavy will give you more benefits with more drawbacks, kind of how armor typically works. And with these armor changes on top of it, you can also customize them now, which is super cool. Just like weapons, there's going to be a table of like your default armor choices that you can pick from, but then you will have the option to customize your own. And maybe you want your armor to really focus on that passive defense side where it can just tank a bunch of hits, or maybe you're more of an active defense kind of character and you're all about that kind of nimble duck, dive, dip, dodge, and whatever the 5Ds are, right? All that good stuff. So kind of cool. It adds a little more customization to your character, but again, you don't have to dive into that. There's just basic options as well. And directly alongside these armor changes comes some shield changes, which the shield changes, to be honest, aren't that drastic. One of the bigger things is the fact that there is a little more clarification and a little more specific rules when it comes to dual wielding shields, which, yes, if you were curious, you can dual wield shields in DC20. Don't question it, just embrace it. But then on top of dual wielding these shields, you can also customize them again, just like weapons. You can take the basic ones that they have on a table, or if you want to add specific properties and things like that and you want to mix and match, hey, more power to you. Coming up next, we have saves, which saves aren't really getting changed in how they function in the game, but the important thing is you no longer have to pick 2 to be like a combat master in for saves. You're a master in all of them. You have proficiency, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, in every single save. So kind of nice, just rounds out the characters, and they found that they made this just typically better for balancing in just about every way. As a brand new thing, although it's not technically new, is going to be character paths, and these character paths are really just as you level up and you gain levels in martial things, or you gain levels in spellcaster things, you inherently get these bonuses such as more stamina or more mana, depending on which, and things like that. This already existed, but it wasn't super clear in how it functioned in the rules, so they pivoted it to where now whenever you are doing a character and you're leveling up, there's kind of this separate table that you follow to give you bonuses. So this one doesn't change any of the balance, it's things that were already in the game, but it just clarified and made it a lot easier in terms of leveling up and knowing what you get and what you don't get when doing so. And next up we have your HP, which is getting a bit of a change because previously they functioned the system similar to how D&D did it. They didn't necessarily go off of like hit die or whatever, but it was a similar concept of each class kind of having its own hit die, so to speak, and each class having its own amount of health, and it being a little wonky. So instead it has changed. Your frontliners are going to have more health than everyone else. Your kind of in-betweeners, right? Things like spellblades, rogues, warlocks that are like little damage, little supporty, right? Somewhere in that weird middle ground, they're going to have a middling amount of health. And then finally, your backliners, whether that be any supports or DPS backliners, those guys are going to have the least amount of health. So health just got standardized across the board, but there's 3 chunks and 3 categories that the classes will fall into one of them. So again, Not that it super changes a whole lot, but more standardizes things and makes it a lot easier and less of, oh, your character has 3, but mine has 4, and yours has 2.5? What? For all my spellcasters out there, you are finally getting some kind of spell adjustments, and this is important because for those that don't know, the next big update, .10, is gonna be the spell update. So it seems like this one is a little bit in preparation for that, and this is just changing how concentration works, or what they seem to be calling it sustain, or the sustain action to sustain a spell when it has a continuous effect. And whenever you are sustaining, the new rule is you're going to spend an action point at the beginning of your turns, which I actually think is super healthy because usually sustain effects are extremely powerful. So this kind of allows you to keep them powerful while feeling like there's a real cost to them, because losing one of your 4 action points every turn is not a small cost. And then it talks about a few things about how whenever you're dazed, you cannot continue to concentrate, and then there's certain classes getting certain, features that allow them to ignore the dazed effect, helping them keep concentration, or if not ignore it, be resilient to it. So nonetheless, quite a few changes. A lot of this just revolves around the idea of they're getting ready to do spells, so expect this to matter a lot more coming the next big update. In terms of grappling and moving creatures, this one didn't get really a big change, to be honest with you. A lot of it's just kind of adding some nuance and some situational rules, things like being grappled by multiple creatures at the same time, how that affects you, and things of that nature. So hey, if you're a grapple heavy class or you're doing some kind of grapple build, then this might be something you want to check out. Otherwise, not too major. With conditions actually didn't get changed themselves all that much, but there is an important effect, and if you knew the rules beforehand, a couple of conditions had something where it would say like bleeding X, and that X meant that you could stack it multiple times. Bleeding you actually couldn't before, that's a whole thing, but that was the example, right? There were some things that it would have an X on it, and that meant that it would, stack on itself, you could do it multiple times. A bunch of different conditions gained that X factor, right? It gained that thing where you can now stack them and do more of them, whereas previously you couldn't. Damage itself is technically changed, more so on like the resistance side of things. It's not really any different. You're not gonna have to learn a whole new system or anything like that. It's just they're now adjusting to be in line with the wording and terminology that defense now uses so as not to cause confusion or create more problems. Grit points themselves are technically getting nerfed, as previously, whenever you could see or hear a creature making a save, you could spend a grit point to grant them advantage, whereas now it is just yourself. Overall, I actually think that's a good change. I thought it was kind of funky to allow a player that maybe wasn't even a support class to be able to just spend a grit point and give someone advantage. Like it just felt a little odd. It felt a little out of place, so I think overall this is a good change, and grit points should be your own grit and your own will fighting. Death's Door itself is also getting a change because you are actually going down not just your combat mastery, but your combat mastery and your prime modifier. So kind of a nice change. It just gives you a little more wiggle room, a little more play room. What they found through playtests is during late game, whenever you were higher levels, you would get hit by attacks, especially if you were low health, that did enough damage that would just chunk you below the threshold anyway. So then you wouldn't even get to use Death's Door, which was kind of a cool mechanic in its own, and it felt a little bad. So everybody gets a little buff in that you can survive a couple more hits through that Death's Door kind of section. There is a very unique change happening to skill points as well, in which typically you are limited to where, if you've seen a character sheet before, there are 5 dots and you can go all the way from like novice to expert. I forget all the different terminologies, but each one is like another +2 on your roll. Typically you're capped depending on what your level is. Some classes and some things would let you go up and you could kind of extend that cap by a little bit. Now, no matter what class you are, if you're willing to burn an additional skill point, let's say for something like athletics, you could have your novice, boom. Now you can spend a skill point over here to bump up that limit one and then plug it in to go past the limit. So you do have to kind of burn an additional skill point in order to move past that limit. But it's kind of cool and provides an option for any character if you really want your character for roleplay reasons or whatever to be focused on a specific skill. You can do that now, and this doesn't change things like Rogue who have their limits moved and stuff like that, and you can still only move your limit by 1. So don't worry, this isn't allowing classes like Rogue to just like full send a skill and have +8 by the time they're level whatever. Like, it's okay, we're avoiding those concerns. Stamina regen was also a little too strong, unfortunately, especially at higher levels, so they've now altered it where you still regen your stamina the same way with all the classes. However, the only rule or restriction, which doesn't affect low level play at all, is that you can only regain up to half of what your stamina max is in a turn. So even this, it does affect some low levels, because let's say you move up to you can hold 2 stamina, you can only regain 1 stamina maximum per turn. Because there were some real problems with certain classes that could easily spam their stamina, where you could regain your 2 and spend your 2. Sometimes if you really played it right multiple times in a turn, it could be pretty disgusting. So this is just a balancing act to help keep marshals in line. Initiative is something as well that DC20 has really focused on making better and as good as it could be compared to many other TTRPGs. And hey, the system already was really good and they're only optimizing it from here, adding a few different changes. The Dungeon Coach himself has a video if you want to dive into that side of things, but just know it's not changing a whole lot, but some minor tweaks to just make it better. Finally, this is one that I have personally made a video over, and that's going to be the opportunity attack and concealable weapon property changes. Go check out my video if you want to deep dive. The long story short, Rogue's gonna be cooking it up different, and we love that. We love to see that at this channel. Whew, now I know that was a lot, but those are going to be all the changes coming in 0.9.5. If there's ones that you want to dive more deeply into, don't worry, the update is right around the corner. The Dungeon Coach announced on his last live stream that it will be within the week. So we're close, we're real close. So hopefully this gets y'all pumped, hopefully this gets y'all ready. And if you love DC20 and you want the PDF, there's a link down in the description. You can click and you can get it. It also supports me as a creator, so it means a lot. And I will see you all on the next one. Peace out.